Excellent. So, so I'm Kevin Marquette. I've been doing community stuff for quite a while, and I've been enjoying some code golf, and that's what we're talking about today. Is like the zen of writing really ugly code. So, so, so to just kind of jump into it, like what is code golf, right? Like it's like this. It's like a challenge or puzzles where you're given a problem to solve, and the goal is to use the fewest number of characters possible. So sometimes the challenges themselves might not be that complicated, because the hard part is how do you strip away those last few characters here and there, and it can be a lot of fun sometimes. Okay, so why code golf, right? I like it because it's like unique problem solving. Like I've got this skill set of PowerShell that I use in my every day, all the time, and code golf lets you think about it in a different way. Like you're using your skill set in a way you just hadn't used before, and it's good for helping yourself find like creative solutions to problems. Because sometimes you might be just writing install scripts all day long, and you're kind of doing the same type of stuff over and over, and this lets you like expand the way you think about problem solving. And they're also good for like interview practice. Like as you're getting more advanced in your career with PowerShell, you'll start finding in the interviews like, hey, let's do this little code challenge. Like as you get more of that DevOps shift, writing PowerShell as part of an interview is starting to become a more and more common, interview piece. So solving these problems like code golf, and there's several sites, places that give you the option to do code challenges, so you don't have to golf everything. But it's just a good way to do old things in a new way. Now, I'm going to talk quite a bit about this one specific website, code.golf, because they have PowerShell support. So you can they have lots of languages, Python, C#, Bash, like whatever your language is, but PowerShell is one that they support that they can run code and they can validate it, and they have their own leaderboards just for that language. Now, I think I was 7th when I took this screenshot, but there's quite a few of us now. Where am I at? I'm 11th on the board. But as we bounce through here, there's several different, they call them holes. But we've got challenges anywhere from mathematical, let's do prime numbers, to 12 Days of Christmas, like how do you output that and generate that song effectively. They've got Sudoku solvers, like just the whole range of different type of things to push different skills. And okay, so the disclaimer is, so I'm pretty well known for like some of my deep dive articles on some PowerShell fundamentals, and I always like to I'd include everything, like everything you wanted to know, and I'd see some of these edge things that I'm like, do I want to tell people about this? Because if I do, they're going to use it. So this is the place where I'm actually sharing all of those things that I never want to see in production code. And part of this is because our production code, you want that readable. Like you're going to spend, like as a dev, you spend 10 times more of your effort is spent reading code than writing it. Because you're always going back, you're looking at referencing things. So your time is mostly spent reading code. Make it easy for yourself to read your code, and you'll thank yourself for that. But yeah, but code golf is none of that. So let's hop into a couple tips and tricks here and run from there. So get my shell set up. Excellent. All right, so a little bit of my notation here. So I'm not going to run every single line every time. So I kind of grabbed a little clip of what the output would be. So like here for get date, it'll give us a string. So if you're like looking ahead or I'm not running the current line I'm on, you can kind of get a guess of what those little symbols are telling us. So I got strings, numbers, and then as we get into the challenges, I'll start prefixing them saying, oh, this section is 8 characters long. So you'll see we'll start at like 300 characters, and as we whittle pieces down, all that little notation there to tell us like how small we're getting. And if you are doing the editing like in the website for Code Golf, I pull up a challenge here. Like if you're actually doing your dev work in here, it'll actually have a real-time counter to where you're at. And like I'll start in VS Code, but sometimes I'll just end up in here. I'll do all my iterating and tweaking like in their interface, because you can just test run, and then they validate. And the other nice thing is like as we run the code, right, it'll actually, like this is one where here's what we expected the output to be, and here's what the actual output is. So one of the first things I do when I'm starting a challenge is I'll just hit run to see if there's test data. I'll get the inputs and see what the output is. And that makes it easier if you're trying to interpret what they're saying in the instructions by just knowing what the output looks like. And then if something is wrong when you run it, it'll clearly tell you, oh, hey, something was wrong here. And not only that, but this specific line of your output was wrong. So you're getting that good real-time feedback. So excellent. And then, what else? Okay, so working with Code Golf, at the end of the challenge, you're always outputting something, right? And they're capturing like all the streams and like anything that falls into the pipeline. So while you can use write host to get output out for the challenge to see it, write output is just as valid, but also so is just like dumping objects onto the pipeline. So if I just drop a string there, PowerShell will display it, and they'll capture that as your output. So right away, by just not using write output or write host, it's actually giving you a nice clean output for the challenge. And then one more nuance. We'll revisit this one a little bit later, but there will be some challenges that provide arguments or parameters, like here's some values, do something, give us the results. And in that site, all of them will come in an array of the arguments. And one of my samples, we'll dive into that closer and actually see what that looks like. But when this pops up, we'll basically take the arguments, for each over it, and then process whatever's in there. And there are some with Unicode characters, but nice thing is you can copy and paste them from the help and instructions into your code. So you don't have to worry about like how do I find this emoji or whatever. No, I just copy it out of their instructions and paste it into the PowerShell, and you can reference and use it. And I've got an example that we're going to be playing with those a little bit too. All right, so the first place you save room in Code Golf is with whitespace. Right, so if you're doing your editing in VS Code, you can actually go into your settings and set this render whitespace all to kind of let you see where some of these are. So if I go and add this to my VS Code file, what did I say it was? All? Excellent. And then I don't know well if it shows up in the dark, but you kind of see these little dots. Do I have this installed? Yeah, there we go. Like dot, dot, dot. Like you see these little dots showing me there's white space. So that might be one way to find things if, depending on how good your font is at showing you stuff. And then the other tip is, there are some code-friendly fonts that make some things easier to see. I guess I'll leave that on for the moment here. All right, so then, all right, there's a lot of white space you don't need. So here's an example here where I'm just going to trim out literally all the white space in this example, right? Because I don't need it between the brace, I don't need it inside of it, I don't need the new line afterwards. This one line, like just by having a return line in here, like that's one more character, right? So if I can actually get something on a single line, I'm saving a character every time I can put something in line on the same line. Math. So operations, they don't need spaces between them either. So you can just take your calculations and just crunch them right up next to each other. And even if they're variable names, since most of these aren't symbols that are valid for a variable name, unless you're doing some special syntax. But that takes too many characters, so I'm not even going to reference it in here. One thing that surprised me as I was first learning code golf was that some things like operators, actually I'm going to come back to that one. The pipeline. So like for each object, like this is where we start using aliases, right? Like for each object, production code, type that, it's better to type that one out. You're on the shell, on the CLI, yeah, we can use the alias. Code golf, you'll only ever use the alias. But yeah, so these lines pop up here. So yeah, these lines are all doing the same thing, effectively. And so I've got my array. And so we're familiar with how these work, but the other one to highlight is that we don't need any spaces in here when you're doing pipeline stuff. So you can just, again, cram that right together. Okay, so here's a jumping just a little bit. So it's the operators, like the comparison operators, they don't need spaces around them either. So like here, I can do 5 equals 5, f, run that. But here, like even though that's a number, like it knows this is an operator and can immediately start the next thing. So it could be a number, a variable, something else. So here's the first place you can start stealing spaces is around all of your operators. Like I said, and it doesn't matter if they're variable names or not, those still work just as beautifully. And then when you start chaining stuff together, right? If you do like an and statement, like, this is all just smushed right together. And yeah, we don't need any of those spaces. Okay. So then we get to the other operators like join. The join statement, you know what? That thing can do a lot and doesn't need many spaces either. So you can actually have like your item, but join right next to it, and your item. But it's just so odd staring at a join statement next to a number. Like there's really unique use cases for something like that. And then the join operator actually has another mode where if you actually flip it, so you take nothing, join it to your item, it just smashes everything together. So there's like no spaces in this join statement, right? So if I have my array initiated here, and if I do just the array, right, you'll see how it dumps them out, one after the other. But if I run this one just above it, it's actually effectively joining them next to each other, no spaces in between, no separators. So there's just again, like to start saving some characters. Split. So very, very similar story here, right? We got we don't need any spaces. We can split stuff right next to it. So while like in your production code, you might say, yeah, key value pairs. But in code golf, if I can get rid of those extra quotes, there's 2 characters I can save if I use some weird delimiter like a 0. Like you get to cheat in your own code golf to allow yourself to do things like this. And split does the same thing too, right? So this will, actually, does that work? Yeah, so here it's automatically splitting on spaces. So I can do dash split, your string, and spaces. It'll dump that into an array for you. Okay, now replace. More fun to replace, right? Okay, so replace basically takes an array of parameters at the end. One of my big aha moments was realizing that you don't actually need the second item if you just want replace to remove something. So here if I say replace dash with just replace dash, it will strip that out of the string and just give me all these things in one line back to back. Here's another example where I'm just yanking out a number, showing I don't really need the quotes on anything. And you can also chain your replaces back to back. So you can do this, replace this, replace this. Now, don't be doing this in production. It already gets ugly enough, right? But yeah, what could go wrong? Absolutely. But yes, but as an operator, there's these special parsing rules. All right. So okay, so working with arrays of strings, right? Like it's like in production, like this is a nice, clean way to say, yep, here's an array of strings we're going to work with, and we can easily inline them. But this is actually optional. This array notation, if you actually have like commas in between them. So just by having a string with commas, this is effectively becomes an array to work with. So there's a couple more characters you generally don't need. But what if you just didn't have to put the quotes in there either? Like if we just make the quotes optional, you could do like write output and put your strings there because it assumes your input is strings, right? This is a handy one on the shell. And then with the alias echo, like I can tell you how often I'm on the shell and I just, echo this, and that, so I don't have to do the whole, VS Code edit, whatever. It's a really handy shell hack. And, but yeah, so there's that trade-off, like echo takes a few characters, but if your string is long enough, it more than makes up for not having to put the quotes around every item. Okay, so I kind of talked about splitting strings, right? So we can also, depending on the type, we have a string that we split. And I had this example above, we're splitting on spaces. There might be more complicated examples where you actually have the spaces in there, so you can, split on the comma. So if the string is long enough, it's cheaper to combine it and split afterwards versus, having the quotes for every item. And then again, if you can choose whatever delimiter you want, you can shove in something that takes less quotes at the end. So here's another fun discovery of mine was like here strings, right? They let you do multi-line strings. You use the symbol. The nuance is like this @ sign at the end, like it has to be on a line all by itself, left justified, right? But this is the exact contents of the string. If you use single quotes, if you use double quotes, you can put variables in there. Single quotes, it's just like a normal single quoted literal string. But strings support multiple lines. Like this is valid PowerShell. Don't do this in production. But you can define a string with your returns in there. And it doesn't have the requirement of being left justified, although it's still, if it was tabbed in, that white space wouldn't be in there. And then if you need to have a way to have lots of text and then break it up, we could always split it on the new line as a way to get multiple separate items. Okay, so variables.
Can't you save one byte by just replacing the dash or like backslash n with a literal new line?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. Okay, deconstruction. So we all know we can assign a variable to something, right? Value equals this. There's this handy feature of PowerShell in some language where I think it's generally referred to as deconstruction, where if you have an array, or array on the right, and you assign it to multiple variables on the left, like it will actually assign the A to the first and the B to the second. So if you have like a function that returns two values, you can say, this thing, comma, that thing, and capture those separately versus having to grab the array and index into it. Yeah, so here's the same. Like if I run this, my first and second will have those two values as A and B. A great example use case is like splitting an email address, right? Like split gives you an array. So if I have an email, I split it on that sign. I can now say user domain equals that, instead of having to index 0, index 1 to find those two after you do the split. So this is real handy. Um, you can do this when you protection scripts. So yeah, I feel like that actually makes stuff cleaner. Now there's some magic you can do, and you might use in some challenges, where if you have multiple items, the first item goes to the first variable, and everything else goes to the second one. So you have a case where it's like, I just need to pull the first thing off and let everything else fall into the second variable. This is exactly how you could how we'd approach that one. Then assigning null. Like sometimes you need null in things, and null has quite a few characters. But if you have an opportunity where you're assigning a couple of variables, you can do this trick where I'm basically getting A into the first one, and the second one gets everything else, which is nothing, right? There's another, because I'm saving that new line. I don't even need the word null in there. So that's a handy trick for code golf, is knowing when you can use that to save a line of code. And another nice little trick is it can be used to swap variables. So if I have these two already defined as A and B, instead of doing, let me put this one to the third variable and move this one over and then shove this one back to the original, right? We can just, in line, just say, yeah, just put the first and second equal to the second and first, and you swap them in one line of code. We can also do chain assignments. So if I need the same thing set to multiple things, we can just say, first equals second equals third, and they'll all get the same value. So it basically like cascades right down the line. So yeah, excellent. So normally when you assign a variable, there's like no return output, right? So when I do n equals a, when we run this, at least on the shell here, there's no output from that. There is if we actually put parentheses around that, we can actually get PowerShell to actually do the assignment and give us the result of that assignment. So here's a way we can do n equals a and give us that value at the same time as something we could work with in a maybe more complex piece of logic. And then adding 1. So, all right, simple syntax, n equals n plus 1. We're probably familiar with n plus equals 1, adds 1 to, increments it. There's a syntax, famous from C++, where if you have a variable and do plus plus, that's the increment operator. And there's 2 versions of it. And this is confusing. So the first one is basically use the value n and increment it afterwards. And the next one is increment n and then use it. Now, sometimes you won't notice it because they're both assignment, and PowerShell is not going to spit out the value either way. But if you're doing scenarios where you are incrementing it and getting the value, then it becomes really important. So basically, like if this was 0, I actually get the value 0. It'd add 1 to be 1 the next time I go to use it in the next loop. Where this trick is like, if I need to start from 1, my 0 would I get 0 plus 1, and then get the value. And there's a lot of code golf challenges where you're just often doing off by 1 type problem solving. And I will be like, it was at this side or this side. Like, I am often testing which one is actually getting me the right 1 or 0 in the right spot in some of these challenges. Yeah, so here's basically the same example with some numbers behind it, like where if I assign these both to 1, and then I add j plus 20, in a mathematical operation here, I think it's actually giving you the value to use. So I got the value 1, return the value 20, but if I check what the value in j is here, right, I'll say it's 2. But here's the case where, yeah, we incremented it before we use it. So it's basically 1 plus 1 plus 20 is 22. And the end after the, after the operation, the 2 is kept in there. Excellent. Okay, so that's kind of more of the same examples. All right, so quite often in code golf, you're looping over stuff, right? You're iterating numbers. Like, give me the first 100 primes. We start from 1 and we work through the list. So there's many different ways to do loops. For each nice common approach to it. And then we've also got like our for loop, right? Like n equals whatever. So we basically have the like initialization, the condition, and the increment. And one really interesting thing about the for loop is that these pieces are all optional, which is very unique to PowerShell, which means that if you need an infinite loop, you can do a forever loop, which is smaller than a while one loop. Oh, I actually got to kill that.
That's why you don't do this in production.
I know. Whew. Caught me hard on that one. Okay. Yeah, infinite loops are bad. Oh, I gotta rerun this one. And then, excellent. Ooh, fun tip. One thing I really love about VS Code is the way you can like navigate through code, right? Like I got this function I can do right-click, go to definition. There is also a jump backwards to where you just were. And I've bound that to one of my side buttons. So even though I went to a different spot in a different file, like, over here, I can hit my go back button. It doesn't jump files, I guess. If I put focus here, I can go back to where I was. I don't know. It's just an aside, but there is a way to jump backwards and forward in your code. It's really, really convenient. All right, but I need tighter loops. So you probably know where we're going with this, is that we're going to use the pipeline, right? Because this is a nice, clean syntax where we say 1 to 100 for each, right? So basically, I'm down to like 12 characters to do the numbers 1 through 100, which is so much tighter than, our nice long for each that is like 25. Yep, 25 characters. And then just kind of calling out then filtering, like we know, we're familiar with like where object, and we got the alias with the question mark, right? So we can do our filtering on things. This is also good for when you want to like do a calculation, but you don't want to return the value back. Like you could basically hide some output from falling through the pipeline. But what's fun about this is that some of these filtering, especially these operators, they work on collections and can do the filtering for you. So here, if I have an array and I say, is this array greater than 3, instead of saying true or false, it gives me everything that is greater than 3. So in this case, 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6. This can be fun because this trick also works with matches, like doing the match operator. So here, if I have an array of strings, and I say, give me everything that has this pattern in it, it will automatically filter it down to, just that list, and I don't have to do the whole, for each object loop. So that's a handy one. And then one more piece of magic that not everybody is aware of, or actually surprised me when I first learned it, is that PowerShell has what we call like soft aliases for all the get commands. So any command that's like get dash and the thing like get dates, you can just leave off the get dash. You actually say dates, and it'll run that command. So like here, we got the dates. I can do service. We can do get verb, like any get command. Except for get process, because process is a keyword in PowerShell for something else. So that's the one I can't, demo. Question?
Just so on that, does that work for anything with get aside from get process? Like if I write my own function,
Yep,
get,
you create your own.
it drops it off.
Now, but it's a soft alias in that if there's an existing command in your system, that always takes precedence.
Clauses then.
Yeah. Whereas with a normal alias, you define it, it would overshadow like the underlying system commands. Like when we had like curl for invoke web request, right? Like that was an alias. It overrode the curl command. But if it was a soft alias, get curl, the existing command would take precedence. That's why we refer to these as soft aliases. And also, if you do get alias, these don't show up. It's just a little bit of magic under the hood. I think if performance really matters, it's doing a lot more lookup, and it's a bit of a hit, right? That's why nobody ever talks about this. But you might have some challenges in CodeGolf where, man, there's 4 characters I don't need if I need to call effectively a get command.
Isn't that how most DSLs are written? Like pester and...
A lot of them do. I think I was going to abuse that in a DSL I wrote, and I decided, I'll just use the short command anyways. And so it's a pattern that could be adopted, and you'll save you some linting errors. But I had headaches with that soft versus not, right? So I ended up not using it that way.
It's also about passive process.
One trick you can use to save exactly 1 byte for the one where the noun is like a keyword, like get process, for example, is to use the invocation operator and then quotes around the thing, because it takes a 3 instead of 4 for get dash, right? If you ampersand and then a string that just says process, you're going to get the same result, right?
Okay.
Because then PowerShell knows that you're trying to invoke a command and that it's not a keyword, right?
Yes. That's so okay. So what I said was, so I just mentioned that like get process. Get process. If I try to actually have the short alias of process, that's a keyword. So when I go to run this, it just doesn't. It's probably not getting an error on that one, but it's not actually executing it. But the trick was, if you need to use process, you actually invoke it by name.
And then you remove the space in between, and now you saved 1 byte, yeah.
There we go. 1 character.
Obviously, you use the PS alias anyways, but
Do this in
And that's a lot of CodeGolf is it's experimenting with nuances, and sometimes you do a lot of work to save 1 character. A lot of work to save 1 character. All right, so actually let's dive into a challenge here, right? So I'm going to hop over into FizzBuzz. It's a great starting one. It covers a lot of different techniques. So, FizzBuzz is where, print the numbers from 1 to 100 with each number on their own line. If it's a multiple of 5, print the word buzz. If it's a 3, print the word buzz. Multiple of 5, it's a 3, print the word fizz. If it's a 5, print buzz. And if it's multiple of both, it's FizzBuzz. And if I look at like the first 15 here, we can see the 1, 2, fizz, 4, buzz. And get down to like 15, which is, the factor of both of them, we get FizzBuzz. And we need to do that for the whole loop. So I'm going to start, the modulus operator. Some people don't realize it, but that's like, you're doing division and you need the remainder. It's a very common way to say, is this even or not? Because if I do something modulus 2, your result is either 0 or 1 to tell you if it's odd or even. So like here's an example where, 3 modulus 2, give me divide by 2, remainder of 1, would give me the 1 item here. So we can use that with modulus 3 and modulus 5 to know if they're a multiple. So if we get a 0 when we do the modulus, we know it's a multiple. And all right, so here's the nice, clean first pass. And like this is something you might have in one of your own scripts. And I will start I'll just code out like I would normally code something. I don't immediately go into the golf mode. Like sometimes I solve the problem so I can see it and think about it and refactor it before I've gone crazy, like I can't understand anything anymore. Because the further you start chipping away at it, the less, the harder it is to look at. So this is straightforward and simple, right? We're checking if it's a multiple of both, we do this, if else, otherwise give us the number and we kick out the result. And this works. As we run this over here, copy, paste, run. All right, so we're starting from a spot of like 287 characters. So we can only improve from there, right? So as I'm looking at it, I kind of, right at the top, I see, actually, I am going to save some things till later in the process. Like some of the white space, I am going to leave in here so it's easier to process and read and understand. We'll eventually yank that out, where I might trim that sooner than later, but this code can be hard enough to read as it is. So this white space is going to stay for a little bit. But in this example, right, like there's probably something clever we could do, because I'm kind of doing the same calculation twice. I'm doing it effectively once up here for both operations and then once down here. So one approach, like, okay, let me see if I can maybe remove the duplicate check, and I could probably like append a result. So if it's 3, I can actually add the fizz to my results. If it's a 5, I can add the buzz. And I've kind of effectively done the same thing. Because if it's a multiple of both, I'll have added both fizz and buzz to my little result tracker. And in the end, if I have nothing in my result, oh, I know it's my number. I can spit that out. So that's kind of almost like a flag to toggle back and forth between what we want to run there. And we've saved a good number of characters right off the top there. All right, so now I've kind of like tweaked the logic. Let's compress the variable names and the lines a little bit, because there's lots of these names are kind of long. That's a lot of characters. So I'm going to use R and N, where N is my looping variable, and R is my result that I'm tracking. And just by using one character variables, which I love self-documenting variables in production. Like my scripts have all these beautiful names. Not in this one so much. Okay. And then, right, we've got stuff on one line. Like it's effectively the same code as above, just shorter variables, and everything's on a single line. All right, so let's start chipping away. Start at 138. We go down to, all right, so we're currently talking about iterating numbers, right? So instead of this for each loop, we can use the pipeline to get us down to just the alias, which is 12 characters. So now we're doing this for each over their same logic, and that's 25. Yes, we're down to 125. All right. So as I'm looking at these if conditions, man, there's a lot of characters in here. So if maybe we could do it differently, where instead of doing the R plus here, let's you play with things. Let me try it this way and that way, and get a little bit of trial and error. So if we could flip this, we could possibly even, we start thinking oh, would a ternary operator kind of work in here, right? So one thing about the Code Golf site is that it is running PowerShell 7. So we get to use some of the newer tools and commands that actually work quite nicely in some of these Code Golf, and the ternary operator is one of those. So and it's basically like we've got a condition on the left, like here's our condition. If it's true, we do this value. If not, we do this one. So we're going to have basically like a if-else right there in one line. So we can take that same operation above and say, all right, here's our condition. Is the number a multiple of 3? And being equals 0, I know what it is. If so, we'll do fizz. If not, I'll do a blank here. Okay, so that's awesome, but I think I can get rid of this even more, right? So here I'm checking explicitly for 0. Well, what if I didn't have to check for 0? What if we can flip the condition? So instead of having the not equals on the right, we can say, all right, if number multiple of 3 is anything but 0, that's true, we'll do nothing. And then if it is 0, which is false, we'll do the fizz. So here we're saying, yeah, so basically anything that's not a multiple of 3 will do nothing, and the one thing that is, we do fizz. Because, like, yeah, 1s and 0s are trues and falses when they are when they're evaluated. All right, but there's still quite a few characters here. So I'm going to actually introduce like this old school ternary trick we used to use. Well, PowerShell 7, this is nice. Sometimes we can cheat and use some older techniques. And the way we used to do this was you create an array and then index your operation, because if it's a 0, it's the false value, 0. If it's true, it's the 1 value, which is the second item in the list. So here we can do off of a false true, we can get a couple specific values. Now, while okay, this does look like more characters, but I could also just have a if false, because if I do my operation right, like I can actually get to say, all right, so if I get a null value back, I don't need the null in my array, right? So if I have a single item of fizz, and my value here is 0, I get fizz. If I index into it as 1, I get the thing after fizz, which is nothing, which is null, right? Because you can always index into an array to an index that doesn't exist in there, and PowerShell gives you null back. So here, if I get a 1 or a 2, I don't have anything, so it's null. So in a way, I've got a if false statement here to tell me if I got a value. But here's kind of a nuance, like it must be an array, or this trick doesn't work, because you can index into strings. And you kind of have the wrong, so you then you get this problem where the 0 is the F and the 1 is the I, when you really want it is string or no string. So, and actually, it has to be right. Like here's just an operation that's giving me a string, and since the result's still a string, I'm still getting that index in there. So the nuance is, right, you have to say, hey, this thing is an array to do this if false trick, which is annoying because that's extra characters. Like I'm cheating, I want these characters back, so I hate putting those in there. All right, so let's loop back to FizzBuzz. We got, this is our example, kind of where we left off, our if statements, and if we replace those if statements with this if false logic, now I've taken this line, this little piece here is 19 characters. I've got a plug-in that show me in the very bottom there. I'll look at it occasionally. That says like how many characters I have selected, which helps with code golf challenges. So when I check this one up here, and I check that value, I'm at 28. So just by doing this really ugly hack, it's dirty, but now we're starting to cook with gas, right? Okay, so the number condition, all right? Kind of got a lot of characters there. How can we make that simpler? All right, so right now we're doing the if the value is nothing, give me back the number. We can kind of do the same thing with ternary, right? And this is kind of where it can be handy. It's like, okay, if this value is nothing, give me a number or return the value. We flip it to get stuff on the right side, and now we're down to that's in 2 lines. But when we run this one, we get the, all right, so if R is false, give us that. Otherwise, give us the number. But my number's not defined. Where's my number defined at? Oh, I'm going off script here. There it was. There it was. See, I have this rule where I'm supposed to run every line of code in my scripts, and then sometimes I don't. And then, okay, so with it being there, so when this is empty, and we run that line, and then this line here, I get the 4. But if my R value coming through the loop is fizz, right, well, we'll get that one, and then here, and then fizz actually gets outputted. So if we've got something, we get it. If not, and this is down to like 10 characters for that same effective, if statement that was 24 before. Okay, so taking a peek at the old ternary, like the nuance is that you have to have a bool in here. Well, I take that back. You can't use a string, right? Like that empty true false worked. My true false worked beautifully before because I was doing number values, and those index beautifully. But like an empty string doesn't index into an array. Like that's one where PowerShell's going to throw up and say, hey, we can't do that. So if we cast it as a bool, then we get the 1, 0, but it's still kind of long. Now we can use this not operator, say not this thing, which forces it to a bool, but the opposite of what you had. So it's like, give me the opposite of what it is as a bool, and then you basically have to flip your things again. But it's a way that if you need something as a boolean, is it there or not? The x nothing becomes flipped to be true, and that becomes 0. But yeah, that's how you could force a bool clause. All right, so fixing our statement up again. Now we're 89 characters. Like here's our ternary, right? So, okay, now we're starting to really get something here. We can inline the fizzbuzz, right? Because so before we were doing this 1, 2, 3 lines, well, these can now just be kind of added together. So now I'm just doing one statement out of the gate, R equals fizzbuzz, and there's our ternary. And now I mentioned before we can do this thing where we can assign a value and use it inline. So, like, here's those examples where okay, so a is 5, I get nothing. If I need to use it in the same calculation, I can do a equals 5 plus a to get that value further down the chain, which is really nice for the ternary operator. Like you can actually do a calculation here and use that value as your statement, and then reuse that variable later on in the ternary instead of having to do the calculation a second time. Okay, now this gets ugly because what we just did was we took this R assignment, I wrapped it in parentheses, and I put it in front of the ternary, right? Like this is where code golf. This is where you kind of lose sight of what you're looking at. Like the code gets really complex, hard to see sometimes. It's things like this that I saved to the end because those are the hardest to kind of think through when you need to like change your logic or back up a bit. All right, so let's get this one line. We're at 53 characters. All right, but now that I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, I'm using a lot of characters here for this assignment. So, yeah, so is that the best we can do? All right, so I was looking at our is not. What if we played with like string multiplication? That's something to explore. So if you take fizz times 1, I get fizz. If I take times 0, I get empty. So there's cases where this can be really handy, except for this one, I got to get like the not of the thing to flip it to get the thing back. But you know what? I'm at 14 characters, and I'm 15 here. Like, one character. It's like coming back to that like a year later, like you don't know what that is doing, right? Like it's a mystery. But that's this same trick, doing the string multiplication. I can do this one plus this one, and yeah, so I'm at what, 51 characters here? So there's a, okay, so I'm still using the ternary. And there's another operator that PowerShell introduced, which is, we're going to refer to as like the null coalescing operator, right? It's like if a null equals a value, you know, assign the value, right? The equivalent is like here, like, so if I can do question equals, this means is if the value is null, assign default to it. So if value had something in there, it won't do the assignment. So it's a way to like do like some like, you know, like seed values in there if something wasn't provided. And you can do this inline where you say, oh wait, do the value, but if the value is null, give me something else. So I can now do, yeah. So if you have some input that people are providing empty values and you need to translate it, this is a PowerShell 7 feature. But the nuance is, yeah, so we got here like null, question mark is null. If I run that, we'll actually see the is null pop up. If I have fizz in there and I do the is null check, you know, I get fizz. So I get the value here because there is a value. The nuance is it must be null. So a lot of PowerShell lets you use like true and false in like null type statements where like null becomes false. And so like in if statements, you can do that normally. And in the ternary, you can do that. But here, this is truly, is it null or not? So a false doesn't work here, or an empty string doesn't work here, which, yeah, so they go through this. Yeah, if it's, I get a 1 there, this one here, I get a 0, because it's not null. But versus the ternary, we're a lot shorter. Like, I have to have the space here, because question mark is a valid character for a variable name. So if you're like, I don't know what's going on. You can have, yeah, question marks in variables. So that space needs to be there. And the same with the colon. Like, that's how you do like scoping. Like this thing, colon, whatever, scoping. So after those spaces. But in the case of this being null, this is shorter. So our one-liner, okay, so I have to step back to our trick of indexing in to get nulls versus what I was doing just a moment ago. I said, hey, let's do some like string multiplication. Because if I take fizz times 0, I don't get null, I get an empty string. So I was like, that was a great thought. Like I went down that path, and then I found this other tricks. I'm like, okay, let me back up and take it. Like you kind of come back and forth at these problems, at these lower problems. So I thought this was so elegant when I saw it, and then I takes it back. But with the null coalescing, right now I'm down to 45 characters mostly because as I chip away here, so here I literally just replace it with null coalescing, and then I realize like, you know what? I don't need the value of r again. So let's get rid of those parentheses. I don't need that. In fact, look, I don't even need to assign r anymore. So I basically, if the value is something, it just falls in the pipeline and we get to use it. If it's null, then we put the number in there. So now, yeah, so I put a lot of work in there getting that r assignment stuff to work, and now I'm like, okay, I can get rid of it now. So this is where I was stuck for a long time, and kind of where I left off last year. Like, okay, here's where we're at. I have no idea how to get past this. And it was, and actually, somebody gave me a tip here on how to solve it. But before I reveal that, does anybody know the trick? I thought one person might, but what we can do is we can use script blocks as strings in the right situation. So here, I've got a script block. Now, I still get a script block, but when it's dumped to the pipeline output, the contents is what we see. Right? So if I run this one here, F8, the contents is fizz. And here, because I'm indexing into nothing, it's null. Now, the only reason why that only saves me 3 characters instead of like 6 is because you can't add script blocks together. So what I need to do is have a string on the left to force the casting to make the script block a string. And that was the magic sauce. That now if we add these, so yeah, if I get an invalid operation on this guy. Wait, what? Of course I did. Invocation failed, but here we get fizzbuzz together. So the final solution, and the magic is this part, instead of an array of a string, is a script block. So I don't have the quotes, I don't have the array. And is it actually 42? I thought it was 43. Let's go check that out. All right, so we started with 287 and 42. Okay, 42. That's where we're at. All right, so, okay, any questions, comments on that craziness that is code golf in its most extreme, right? Yeah, that's code golf. I've got a couple more examples here. Let's see which one will work best based off of. Let's do arrows. So this is one that on the challenge site, and it's called just arrows. And the challenge is you're starting at 0, 0, and the input is an arrow of a direction. And you basically got to walk the path. When it says we go right, you change your coordinates to say, oh, we went one x, y coordinate to the right, or to the left, or up and down, or diagonal, because we have diagonal support here. So if we go to the left, right, we're going x, y, to the left, -1. So this is one of those that sounds harder than it is. And but what the nuance here is okay, I can copy paste these values into PowerShell. And when I'm actually doing the prep here, if I actually want these in something, I can actually just, take this block, I can just delete the stuff I don't care about, right, and actually have just those values to work with. So whatever approach I take, I can just copy and paste these values in there. So I don't have to know or deal with ASCII codes. Unless you can find patterns in the numerical values of the codes. Like here, there's a, 93, 94. I didn't find the one in here, but in some challenges you might find that. If the characters are all in a sequence, you say, oh, hey, let's use that. But in this case, I'm not doing that trick. So the off-the-cuff solution, so our input, right, is these here. Here's a sample output. Off-the-cuff solution is well, you know what? If I create a hash table where this is the key and this is the value, they give me an input, I do the hash table, I know what to do, I add it to my XY, and we repeat, right? So as you find the solution, okay, that doesn't sound that bad. Then you look at it, okay, that's a lot of characters. But the solution actually doesn't feel that bad at all. So that's where we start to get clever. Okay, how can I not have just a giant hash table? So, so the magic I came up with is, okay, well, what if, let's try something else here. What if I had the set as the key? So now I got a third less character, 60% less characters. If the key actually contains all the values, and I do something where I actually just do a regex match, they give me a value, and I basically ask, does the key match the value they gave me? So I'm basically treating their input as a regex pattern. So when they give me like the down right arrow, and I run through every key, I'm going to get the match of this one here, and then I can use that output to do my calculation. So when I run this, right, I'm getting 1, -1, which is the array of is that the right one? 1, -1. Yep. So it looked it up in here and got that value. Awesome. Awesome. So, okay. Using match, but I told you before, we can actually just match against all the keys. Like I don't have to do the whole for each loop because match works against a collection and a list, and we'll just match the one thing in there. So the fun story is, yeah, I can take all the keys, take their input, and I get I can get the key that matches it to do the lookup. It sounded beautiful in theory. Well, it works. I discovered something I didn't know about PowerShell, was that when you do a match statement, it always gives you an array. So if I have no matches, I get an array of nothing. If I have one match, I have an array of the one item. That didn't surprise me so much. But what surprised me was, so if I got a hash table here, and I look up one item here, right? I get 1. You know, you can put in multiple values into hash tables. Really awesome feature. But if I hit, yeah, and then like you can go backwards, like, oh hey, A, B, A, like we can run, you know, we can do multiple things. That's really handy for hash tables. And then, but when you're putting an array in here, like this works. But as I start looking at what do I get back? So here, if I do index of A, I get just the number 1. But if I actually have any array in here, the hash table gives me an array of, actually, let me clear that. All right, let's run this one line. Oh, okay, yeah. So basically, I get an array that has one thing in it. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes it does. So in our case, so why does it matter? Okay, so when I run this with our list here, right, like I can get, it's confusing because my array holds arrays, right? And what I ran into was because I was getting an array of arrays, when I thought I could index X and Y, I actually had to like index into the first item to get my X and Y. I'm adding extra characters, like, yeah, like this is, you're a scientist, like theory, you know, hypothesis, let's see what happened. But through that, you know, we get our match operator, and as long as I just, okay, I do my match, I grab the first thing, but now the rest of this just works. So it was rough getting there, right? You know, bumpy road, but trial and error. Now, but it is getting much more, you know, much more compact. Okay, so now I've got this match logic where I'm matching on the keys, I get the value, and then we, okay, so another spot, we've got a little bit of extra space, is this guy here, this one row actually had like 6 characters to it, and I got to think, well, why can't I just like make that like a, if I find nothing, give me the 0, 0. Like I don't actually have to go look that up, because that's like, I'll make that the catch-all. So if I tweak this logic here to remove the 0, 0 equals, I can use our null coalescing trick to say, give me 0, 0 for anything else, which is always those items. So we got to, you know, shave off a few more characters just by juggling, you know, what a default value is and makes sense as. Okay, so now I'm going to start whittling away. Like, I don't actually need to set X and Y to 0 because, like, in the Code Golf app, no variables are initialized, right? So everything comes in as null, and we start adding, you know, 1 to null, it becomes 1. Like, they become numbers as you start working with them in these cases. So if I have null and I add a value to it, it then becomes that value. So basically, these starting as null aren't a problem. But in my VS Code, I have to do the remove variable for my testing, right? But in the console, I don't have to. 191 to just by removing that x and y initialization, right? We're down to 181. And then, okay, where else can we start saving some stuff here? Well, let's start trimming a little bit of white space. Like if I move, in fact, it might be easier if I just do it in line here. So if I take this guy here and we like move him up, there's some white space. Take this guy here, there's some white space. We got white space here. We got white space here. I might not do this one right away because we start getting really ugly. But we'll just do a quick pass of like that. And that saves us quite a bit as we're kind of whittling down towards the finish line. Okay, so what did I end up with here? Oh, I guess I did do that. Sorry. But so everything's on one line where it can be. Then we'll start looking for the next layer of opportunities. So I'm trying to find a way to get these like more in line, right? So we're at 159 characters here. And if there's a way I could do these operations on one line, we might have something. So I go through a lot of trial and error, and I have those examples in here, but it's like, okay, so if we have an array by itself, we get an array, but if I put in a string, I get the two values kind of on the output the way I want to. I can also like take a string plus the array to cast it to a string to kind of give me that same output. And I think that's what I end up kind of looping back to. But as we're trial and error, like, okay, we inline values, x and y. Do we try like inside the string? Let's just do the well, we basically invoke the variables in line. That's still kind of long, but I kind of started coming down this path of like, okay, what if we could do the parentheses around the value to get the value and assign it and put it in the string? Like we're really doing some heavy dancing here. And I keep dancing around until I kind of come up with this where I have an array of, so I do this assignment, give me the value. Do this assignment, give me the value. Put the comma in there to make it an array. And I got to add a string to it to get it to end up in the format that I want. And doing that gets us down to, see what were we at before? 159 characters, right? So if we do just that, insane level of juggling, did I not get anything? One character. I got one character through all of that juggling. And it was true trial and error. Let's push and shift and do this thing. And then, my next trick here is, I know we say these for the last, is that, I can inline this hash table. Like, I can actually put this hash table, right in here and reference it, right? So now, one more character, we have this monstrosity, because now I've got my hash table here. I'm saying, give me the value of it, so I can index into it to do all the crazy stuff. To get, there's one more character. Now, we're right at the end. There's actually one more spot we can save 2 characters. I don't think we I don't know if you spot it early on or not. Like it's a real, I don't know, it's a clever one. But see where we started doing the 0, 0 as the return value to give me some values back to do my other calculations. Do I actually need both those zeros? See, I'm using the value 0, but if I get null, that's 0 in math. Close enough anyways. So by deleting those 2 characters, I got my proof here, but down to 155 as our final answer. That's doing the walk from what was beginning just a nice clean hash table lookup. Arrows. Wait, what? And run. so like here you can see the inputs are individual characters, so the array loop works perfectly. And there we go. Now I have no idea. Somebody's more clever than me has gotten this really.
I've got a question.
Sure.
Tables, you don't have to put quotes around at least normal strings.
Ooh, good call. Let's see which ones it likes and doesn't like when we do that.
I don't know if it'll take.
I completely overlooked that one. I didn't even test it. So we're at 155, 139. Ooh. Missing closing. All right, let's just check one of these, right? But there might be something there. Because like I'm at 155, but the leaderboard here, a mystery to me, is 66. I've got more than 66 characters in my hash table, right? Ooh, you know.
I wondered if you could get rid of all the negatives by just using like incrementing everything by, say, 3, and then doing a -3 just during your output.
Remove the comma after the -1 online. Or put it back in front of it.
Let's do it in this one. Might be something there, but something to play with, right? Like that's, you get those ideas and like you tweak and you play. Like that's where, you know, I'll probably spend another 2 hours chasing that thought. So thank you. Excellent. Okay. So how are we doing time here? I'm going to jump to 12.
We called this session Nerds, and I think.
It is absolutely that. That's why every once in a while I'll post those challenges and I will distract people away. All right. This one, 12 Days of Christmas, right? Simple concept. We need to basically print the song on the first day of Christmas, yada, yada, yada. And then we increase the line each leap through. So here's one where, okay, simple attempt. I decide that because the name changes, we'll just do days. We'll have like a list of days, first through whatever, the song, each line. And then I'm going to basically loop through. So each time we do a loop, we'll basically output the rows of song from the index down to 0. So basically kind of doing like a reverse. Like on the first one, we'll get this one. On the second one, we'll do 2, then that one. So basically kind of almost doing this reverse, like print this line, then that line, then that line. Because I'm going to basically count down from, you know, a higher number down to 0. Reverse direction. So if we accept that's what that does, and we start whittling away at ways we can make this, you know, tighter and cleaner. So we've kind of already said, hey, we can compress the arrays, right, by using this echo statement. So I can echo all these names. There's a ton of quotes, just vanish just like that. I can show you that VS Code, right, has really beautiful multi-line editing. So we need to do something like that. You can kind of do the like Shift-Alt, you know, delete. Actually, let's not do that one yet. Let's do the end. We can do that. I can do home, delete, space, right? Like, so there's some cool features in VS Code to help you, you know, hack some of these. But down the rabbit hole there. All right, so we take our array of strings. Let's see how we can kind of make this cleaner. So instead of doing array strings, we can actually do like a here string and split on the new line, because that's a valid thing to split on to get my array. And of course, we realize that I don't really need a here string, right? We can actually just have a string that runs multiple lines and split on the new line. So pulling those pieces together, right, I get an array of my first, second, third, fourth, whatever. I get my song that I can reference, and my loop is still the same, right? Through each one, we run the items. You know, I'm doing the split to make sure we have a nice, clean array for the indexing here. All right, we already learned that, hey, the for loop, man, there's so much room we can save there. So we'll convert the for loop to a for each object loop, right? Just do the counts. We know the numbers, the range. So this part, we can just loop over with for each object. All right, so, but then I realized, like, you know what? I already have, like, my days is the exact size of the looping I need. So I could actually just loop over that first collection I made, right? Because right here, we're running the song, a loop once for first, every day of the loop. So in that case, let's just, instead of actually iterating numbers, we'll pass in the days, which means I don't have to look it up either, right? Because I was looking it up before, you know, based off of an index. Well, let's just, you know, inject the value in line, and then if I'm, you know, doing that, we can actually just put the variable in line. Like I don't need to do the format string anymore. So yeah, variables in line. All right, so I'm at, yeah, so here we go. So we're looping over days, inline that one chunk. So pulling this back together again. We have our setup, looping over our days. So we're getting nice and tight here. In fact, here I'm just thinking, like, man, I'm defining the days, and I'm just using the days here. We can inline that pretty easily, right? So now we're just doing, I move it down. So we say, echo all the days. As we scroll over, right, we're just looping off that. And I've gotten rid of an entire variable. Like that days variable vanished. I didn't have to shorten it. I just got rid of it. Excellent. OK. I felt like, for me, there's a lot of repeating in here. Like, I see this pattern. Like, you know, there's lots of, like, new line commas. Maybe that's. There's this ing comma, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Let's just do a little substitution. So my hack was, let's just put a variable, ing. That's a little bit expensive. But if I use it enough, I save enough characters. So I'm at, what, 462 from 464. So 4 characters by shoving extra variables in there. Oh, what fun, oh, what fun. But getting tighter and tighter here. We can inline. Okay, I can inline the song and remove the indent, right? Like I'm creating the variable song and I'm only referencing it once. Like I don't even need a variable for that, do I? So to get down to 436, so I basically do the split and then reference into the resulting array. Now, what am I missing here? Okay, and then to actually make it complete, I move this new line as well. Like I kind of found like, oh, you know what? I can actually new line here. If I just shove this thing up on top, so full circle here, I actually do open quote, return, and then I have to change my logic a little bit. This is one of those cases where I actually flipped my plus plus I from I plus plus. Because before I wanted, you know, 0 to 0, like, but now I actually want to start from 1, like, so yeah, just one of the cases where, like, yep, if I flip that 0, I can actually just reference that in there. I save, you know, 2 characters, give or take. Okay. Almost done. Like, I was initializing I. Didn't need to do that, right? Because I know in a runner, I will always be null. When I do plus plus, they'll become 0 or 1 the first time it's used. So there's another variable I need. All right. So, okay, so there's one more savings here, and somebody already mentioned it earlier, was that, like, I was caught on this one for a while, but if we take this new line, out, and just put a new line there, that still splits the string on that new line. Like, that's what we kind of mentioned earlier, like, do not do that in production, please, I beg you. But, yeah, so that's down to 424 characters. And that's where we end up with 12 Days of Christmas for Code Golf. And then we run that one. Now, I was planning to do prime numbers, but I kind of ended up cutting that one for time. But the example is still in my repo. So I post all of my talks out here on GitHub, and the Code Golf one is here. I haven't merged this into main yet, but I do at the moment have a Summit branch.
Yeah, Summit 2024.
It was late. It was late. I'm prepping for next year. No. But yeah, so the highlight there, before we kind of, I suppose we dive into questions and discussions of these things with prime numbers, is for quick flash, down to 35 is my final solution on that one. But the exercise is here if you want to follow through it. So, boy, that was fun. So, yeah, it's just a way to mentally unwind, do something a little bit different. It's for the ADHD or nerd sniping, something to just kind of distract your focus from other stuff that's going on. And yeah, I've burned a lot of hours just sitting away, picking and experimenting and learning how PowerShell works. Like, there's many things in here I learned by saying, what about this, what about that? Like, just trying things over and over. Many of those discoveries, I'm like, I had no idea I didn't need that dash, replace and the extra character, at the end, or replace and do a remove. I'm like, yeah, so many of these things I discovered through that process of trial, error, and challenging my assumptions. Like, does that really need to be there? Okay, yes, that one does. Like, does that one need to, there's a lot of those that, So, excellent. Any questions or things we want to loop back on? I know it was a long talk, so I appreciate you guys kind of sitting through all that. Sure.
12 Days of Christmas, if you go back to that,
Yeah.
could you save another few characters by that A, or the dash A dash, by putting that in a variable?
Maybe, right? So here, okay, so here's, we got to do the math, right? So it's 1, 2, 3. I got 4 references of 3 characters, so I got to do it in less than 12. But it's going to cost me 2 characters to put a variable in there, right? So now I got to say is, can I, in 4 characters, define a variable to replace in there? Like, that's where I got stuck at this one. But if we look at the board on this one, if we look at the board on this one, somebody's got, 14 characters on me, right? So there is something in there. And yeah, so I got 14 characters to go yet. So there is a big saving somewhere.
Kevin, what's the second number on that?
Oh, sorry, so the board does both bytes and characters. Let me go back over to characters. I tend to think in characters. So where am I at here? I'm at 424 characters. Here's somebody in 198 characters.
So,
But I will say, but the bytes are pretty similar. So they could be doing some and the reason why they have that distinction is sometimes you can do some like clever stuff with encoding. Like, oh, hey, if I have this encoded in Unicode, I got extra data to reach in and do something with. In fact, one of my attempts with the prime numbers was I was going to store a bit string, like a 64-bit value, with the ones and zeros for which values would have been prime or not to just look into. And anyways, it didn't work for what,
And the leaderboard, all solutions are PowerShell.
You can filter to PowerShell. So you could choose whatever language, but the board is in your language, and there's an overall board if somebody wants to dance across lots of them. And then I will say, I said that I've had some ugly solutions to a lot of these. So the first thing I will do when I'm doing one of these, where's one where I have like a really poor score? I can sort this by points. Like this guy here. I got 1 point on this solution. Let's play this whole. What did I do? I ran it, and I copied and pasted it. I grabbed the output and pasted it in the solution.
At least you're on the board.
I'm on the board, right? You get points. Especially when they like add a new challenge, right? You do that, you could be like the fourth person. I mean, like you'd be the first person and have 1,000 points until people start, beating you to that trick. So, yeah, 20,000. But it passed. Now, usually performance doesn't matter. So like the prime, the first 100 primes, like that one's a pretty quick one. They've got one like the first 1,000 primes that they have like a limit on how long that one can run. So your one solution might be elegant for one, and I try it in the second one, it just times out. So it's saying, okay, not only do you have to be clever, you also have to be efficient. And it changes your whole algorithm and approach. So, excellent. All right, well, I think we can wrap that one up right here. Yeah, I appreciate everybody for coming. I'd love any feedback, and we can talk on the hall for more of these nuances. And if you guys discover little things like this, that PowerShell works in ways that you think most people wouldn't expect it to work, go ahead and ping me. I love those gems. So, excellent.